Okay, let's get started. It's 2 p.m. and welcome to all of you who are joining us on this webinar. Thank you for joining. Also thanks to Jeff Broider for organizing this. We're going to be spending about 30 minutes together. I want to go through the material I'm sharing with you for about 20-25 minutes, and then via the chat function, which you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, please feel to post any questions or comments during the webinar, and then I can address them at the end. So my name is Saul Janogly, the Wealth Rabbi, and my mission is to bring truth and values to the world of wealth. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been involved in the world of investments for over 30 years, and been a rabbi for 25 years or so. So in terms of my personal experience investments, I've had two very eminent teachers. My two greatest teachers have been Mr. Trial and Mr. Error. And as you can see, I'm just bringing up, in case there's any errors here with your computers and you can't hear me via the computer, you can dial to this number, please. I'm going to pause here a moment to give people who can't hear an opportunity to write the number down, and then I will move on. Okay. So I want to share with you the 3 secrets of cost-effective investing. These are simple truths that I've learnt over 30 years. As I said before, at sometimes a great personal cost and certainly with a lot of stress along the way. So I'd like to put you in a position to benefit from my mistakes. I'm going to be coming at the end of this session, and you'll see that this screen will appear. It will say yes, TIO. It will also say no, and finally there will be a sentence for you to complete. The next 12 months are going to be so much better for my investments because, but I'll be returning to that later. Okay, so let me share with you this slide. As well as being a rabbi, I'm actually learning a new life skill. As you can see, this is a circumcision set, and I'm actually going to be practicing and experimenting on you today. Now, before you get too alarmed, what I mean by this is I basically want to be able to cut through all the BS that is out there about investments and effective investing, to peel back all the layers and expose the naked truth for you, so that to empower you to make better decisions. So let's start with secret number 1. And what I want to ask you today is it cost effective for you to pay someone to do something they can't do? Are you paying your managers to do something that they can't possibly do? And if you are, is that not a waste of your hard-earned money? Now, what do I mean by this? I share here with you a slide to put this in investment perspective. The question I want to ask you is, can anybody, including investment professionals, accurately predict the future? Now, here you see a slide which shows you the different returns from different equity markets and asset classes between the years 1995 to 2011. I want to just, for instance, focus on the bright red, which is the emerging equity. As you go along the top line horizontally, you can see in several years, emerging equity markets have been the best performing. But on the other hand, cast your eye right down to the bottom, and you will see that equally there have been 5 years in this period where they've been the worst performing. So what we have here is a crazy quilt work pattern. And the question I have for you is, can you or your advisors predict what this pattern is going to be in future years? And the simple answer is no. Nobody can predict the future reliably and consistently. Now, similarly, I showed you a slide before that dealt with what I call market selection, selecting the best markets to be in, whether it be by asset class or whether it be by geographic location. So I'm talking about it's impossible ahead of time to consistently and reliably predict which markets are going to be the best performing? Here on my next slide coming up, I want to show you whether it is possible to be reliably in and out of the market, what we call market timing, so that you can be out of the market when it's falling, but at the same time capture the very best days which are critical to return. Now here we've got an example taken from the UK market, but the same applies to all global stock markets. Between January 1986 and December 2011, you can see if you had been in the market at the beginning of that period, January 86, through till December 2011, £1,000 would have grown into £10,890. That if you'd sat through that entire period and was fully invested. On the other hand, if you missed just the single best day in that entire period, you can see your return would have fallen to 7,647. And similarly, if you had missed the 5 best days, your return would have, £1,000 would have only become 5,938. So what you see from this slide is you have to capture the best days in the market in order to maximize your return. So the question on the table is, how can you capture those days if you are pursuing a market timing strategy of trying to be out of the market when it's going down, in the market when it's going up? So what we're talking about here is the impossibility ahead of time. We're all wonderfully wise with the benefit of hindsight, but it's impossible ahead of time to time the market accurately. The only strategy that you can employ in order to capture these critical best days is, in fact, to sit it out and be fully invested throughout your investment period. So my question to you is, which type of investor are you? There's a guy called Terry Smith who I really admire here in the UK market, very, very successful investor, and he says there are only 2 types of investors. Those who know they can't make money from market timing, and those who don't know they can't. There are no other types of investors. And I think the same holds true also for market selection, trying to select ahead of time the very best asset classes or the very best performing individual markets, whether it be the US market, Japanese market, European markets, etc. So it therefore follows, if you are paying your advisor and they have set out their stall to you, as they are able to either select markets ahead of time or time markets, and we've seen that this is something which is impossible to do because by definition nobody can consistently and accurately predict the future. The question on the table is, why are you paying them for something that they can't reliably and consistently do for you? As my grandmother used to say, waste not, want not. So that's the first takeaway. That's the first secret that I want to share with you. Don't waste your money on people who claim that they can predict the future. And if they do say that they can predict the future, ask them for their past record over the last 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. If they can show you that they did this, please send me an email and give me their number, because I would love to invest my funds and my clients' funds with them. Let's move on. If you are aware of this, though, and your advisor aware of this, what is your strategy with dealing with the unknowable future? And is the strategy working for you? Okay, let's move on to secret number 2. I want to focus on high fees. Is it cost effective for you to pay high fees? And whenever I put this question to investors, they usually answer, well, I don't mind paying high fees if high fees are going to get me good performance. And most of the people out there in the investment universe who are offering their products and they have high fees usually will show you past performance data to justify that high level of fees. They will show you that our fund did so incredibly well last year or in the last 2 years or even in the last 3 years. And the question really is, if they're justifying their high fees on the basis of their past performance, is past performance a good predictor of future performance? Now, here I've got an interesting table which deals with this very question. Are past winners future winners? So I want you to have a look at the top line, and we're going to move across it. Here we're looking at top quartile funds that are coming out of the United States of America. This data is put together by Standard & Poor's. So you see in September 07, just looking at all domestic funds, there were 530 funds which were top quartile. Now the question is, how many of those funds were top quartile a year later in September 08? And the answer is, of that original 530, only 15%. Now moving on a year to September 09, how many of those top quartile funds in September 07 were still top quartile in September 09? And the answer is 4%. Likewise, moving on a year forward to September 10, it gets even lower. We move to 2%. And when we go out 4 years later, September 11, none of the funds that were top quartile in September 07 are still top quartile in September 11. And as you'll see, this is a pattern across all categories of funds. So what we're seeing here is there is no persistence in top quartile performance, in excellent performance. So taking the past and the recent past as a predictor of future performance can be highly dangerous to your financial wealth, and it's certainly no justification for paying high fees to managers. Now the question also is, can we pick those 1 or 2% winners? Here's an interesting slide. What we see as the gray circle is the universe of US equity funds in 1970. There were 355 funds. Well, what's interesting is in 2005, 35 years later, only 132 of those original 355 funds are still around on the block. And when we actually analyze their performance, we see only 9 funds were actually showed a degree of skill, but they were inconsistent winners over the entire 35 years. And there was only 3 funds were able to consistently and in a skilled fashion deliver extra value for their clients. And the question is, if we'd gone back in 1970, how would we have been able to identify the 3 funds out of the 355? And the answer is, it's really virtually impossible. So, if past performance is not the best predictor of future performance, what is? Well, funnily enough, and interestingly enough, it's actually fees. Now, again, here's an interesting table. We're looking at fund management fees and risk-adjusted returns. And I want you to look at the top line, which is the first decile, which is showing you that is the funds which were the least expensive. And what we see is the funds that were least expensive were actually the ones that gave the best return. On the other hand, if we move down to the very bottom, which is the 10th decile, in other words, those funds which had the most expensive fees, again, you see those had the lowest return. So, what comes out of this? Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. But what we do see from this data is that the best predictor of future fund performance, believe it or not, is actually the level of fees. And this was confirmed by a study carried out by Morningstar in 2010, where it showed that in every single time period and data point tested, low-cost funds beat high-cost funds. I repeat, low-cost funds beat high-cost funds. Now, what we really need to understand is what are the fees that are associated with different fund groups. If it follows that high fees predict future poor performance and one of the best indicators, let's have a look at the kind of funds that are out there in the market and the fees and level of fees that you are paying to be invested in those funds. So here we have some data that's coming out of the UK market. In the first column, you can see that the average passive, or if you will, tracker UK equity fund has a cost of about 0.3%. If we move on to active funds, that means funds where managers are actually betting against the market or betting against the index by being overweight one share and underweight another, there's a massive jump in fees to 1.5%. If we move on to a fund-of-fund structure, where you have a fund, a master fund, which is then investing in sub-funds, the cost rises to 2.3. Now let's take that 2.3% figure and compare it with the actual historic after inflation. That's your real inflation-adjusted return on UK equities over a very long period. That's been around 5% over inflation. Now, if you've been paying 2.3% a year to your fund-of-fund manager, you've been giving up nigh half your return to your advisors. Doesn't sound like a very good deal to me. So, let's have a look at some independent research here produced by the Financial Service Authority here in the UK. They had an interesting paper that looked at the price of retail investing. They came to the following conclusions. Retail investors are unaware of their full charges. You may well be aware of what you are paying your investment manager to manage your portfolio, his annual fee. But are you totally aware of the cost of the underlying funds that he is putting in your portfolio? That's question number one. Number two, investors do not understand how charges can affect their performance, and I'm going to show that effect to you in a moment. And the charges that are out there in terms of data that clients and investors can look at, the data is incomplete. And certainly here in the UK, the US is better, but here in the UK, it can present a misleading picture. Not all the true costs are out there and are entirely visible. And the fascinating thing here is those non-explicit costs, the costs which you don't see on your statement, account for about half the total cost of portfolio management. Now, why am I banging on about fees to you? Because the fact of the matter is that fees matter. We've already seen that high fees are the best predictor out there of future poor performance. Well, here I want to show you the effect of different fee rates on a portfolio which gave exactly the same return. So if we assume a 6.5% annualized return over 30 years for a portfolio which started with £1 million, at a 1% fee per annum all in, you can see your portfolio will grow to nigh on £5 million. On the other hand, with a 2% fee, so it's only 1% more, doesn't seem to be that much, your total drops quite significantly to 3,745,000. And at a 3% fee, well, you can see it's only 2.8 million, almost half the identical portfolio which only had a 1% fee. So please, I really do implore you, you really need to get to the bottom of what you're paying by way of all fees and charges, explicit and implicit, revealed and unrevealed, because 1% difference you can see over the long term, because of the power of compounding, makes such an enormous difference. So that is secret number 2. Pay attention to fees. Let's share with you secret number 3. So secret number 3 is, and this is another question I want to ask you, is it cost effective for you to pay more for unforced errors? You know, we've currently got Wimbledon going on here in London. If you watch the tennis, many times the fate of a match is actually determined not by the skill of the opponent, but actually the unforced errors that a player makes during the course of play. Now, you may say, what on earth has this got to do with investing? Okay, well, the fact of the matter is we all know that most accidents are a result of human error. In fact, 90% of car accidents are as a result of human error. And we've got the chairman of the International Organization for Road Accident Prevention backing us up on this and confirming this. So how does this apply in the world of investing? So I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine. I want to introduce you to Orlando. If you haven't met Orlando before, Orlando is a cat. Orlando participated last year in a very interesting competition which was run by the Observer newspaper, a leading newspaper over here in the UK. And they launched a 2012 share portfolio challenge. And they had 3 different managers who are very highly regarded and well thought of here in the UK participating in this share portfolio contest where the managers had to pick a portfolio of shares and see who would do best. They also had Orlando, and they had a way by which Orlando, by pressing a button with his paw, would also select individual securities. So we had these 3 eminent gentlemen, fund managers, highly regarded, pitched against Orlando the cat. How did they do? Well, the interesting thing is Orlando managed to turn in 1 year, if we just went with the shares that he picked randomly with his paw, he managed to turn £5,000 into 5,542. The professionals were only able to turn 5,000 into 5,176, and the kids from one of the local primary schools, well, they didn't do it as well. In fact, they lost money, and 5,000 became 4,840. So before we all queue up to ask Orlando to manage our money, the one interesting thing that the Observer newspaper didn't mention was that if you'd simply bought a low-cost UK equity index fund, a tracker fund here in the UK, £5,000 would have turned into 5,583. Now, the point I'm making here is that if you pay fund managers to manage portfolios and take decisions, investment decisions, there will inevitably be human error associated, and that human error actually results most of the time in an underperformance of the simple benchmark. Okay, and we can actually see this effect coming into play here in this data that I am showing with you now. Do error-prone human fund managers, whether it be ourselves or managers that we are backing, add value or destroy value on an annual basis? And again, here we see the data that we can see that, in fact, in any given year, over a 10-year period, we can see that 62% of managers will actually underperform their benchmark. Over 15 years, it's 67%. Over 20 years, it's 72%. So if you're with a fund manager for 10 years or so, the odds are that he's actually going to underperform his index. And that's simply the result of the mistakes that we all make as human beings. Let's move on, because what I want to do is actually share with you a little bonus secret. We've done 3 secrets so far. Let's have a look at a 4th. Bonus secret number 4. My question to you is, are your fund managers flying on autopilot most of the time? You know, if you take a plane anywhere, I think you'll find that 75 to 80% of the time that you are in the air, your plane is actually being flown on the autopilot, and in fact the pilots only take over for takeoff or for landing. Now the question I want to put to you is, does the same hold good for your fund managers? Are they flying the fund on autopilot 75 or 80% of the time? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, if you look at a good many funds, and I would say the vast majority of funds out there, because of the fund managers' herding instinct, they will always try and, as closely as possible, hug the index, their underlying benchmark, because they know that they're never going to be sacked for slightly underperforming or for slightly outperforming. But if they really were to radically depart from the underlying benchmark in the portfolio, they run the risk of a significant underperformance. So as a result, they play it safe. So I would say 60 to 70% of the funds that are out there are actually pursuing what is known as a closet tracking policy. They are closet index trackers. I sometimes call these funds sheep in wolves' clothing. They promote themselves as being active managers who are taking lots of decisions which are very different from their benchmark and from their index, and that's how they're going to add value for you. But when you actually look at the underlying fund, and we're able to do this with some of the tools that we have, we can see that up to 80 or 90% of the fund return is determined by the performance of its underlying benchmark. So my question to you is, do you know which of your funds are actually doing this? Because that begs the question, if they are in fact closet index trackers, why are you paying high active fees for an active, expensive, human investment manager, when in fact 80 to 90% of the time what you're seeing is exactly the same as if you were in a low-cost index tracking fund? So the bonus secret number 4 here is you need to lift the bonnet on the funds you're invested in and ask yourself or your advisor, are my funds really closet index trackers? Are they sheep in wolves' clothing? So we're coming towards the end of our time together. I like to show the slide. I know it's a very unrabbinic slide, but this is a picture of bacon and eggs. And as you can see on this picture of bacon and eggs, which is a standard breakfast staple here in England, one of my friends said to me, what's the difference, Saul, between the eggs and the bacon? Well, the eggs came from the chicken and the bacon came from the pig. And as he said to me, Saul, the difference is, as far as the chicken is concerned, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. So the reason why I'm telling you this little amusing anecdote is, the question on the table is, are you merely involved in your investments? Are you merely paying lip service to being a cost-effective investor, or are you truly committed to being a cost-effective investor? So, the 3 secrets of cost-effective investing. I brought up a slide right at the beginning of the show with yes, with TIO, and with no. Well, what does TIO stand for? Well, TIO actually stands for think it over. And in my experience, when most people say, I'm going to think it over, what they really mean is no. So what I'd like you to do, please, at the end of our session here together, if you've got pen and paper, is write out for yourself the following statement. The next 12 months are going to be so much better for my investments because. Just please fill in the gap. Give some thought to what you're going to be doing, the actions that you're going to be taking in trying to become a more cost-effective investor in order to make sure that the next 12 months are going to be so much better for your investments over the long term than the previous 12 months. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. Apologies for the technical problems that we had at the beginning. This is my first webinar. I'm new at this game, and thank you for joining. What we're going to be doing here now is I'm going to be sending you an email straight after this presentation. What I'm going to ask you to do is, the email says simply, if you do not wish us to contact you ever again and not be on our mailing list, please just hit the reply button. Otherwise, we will be in contact with you just to see whether there's anything we can do in terms of help, assistance, any questions you may have about this session, whether there's any practical applications in terms of some of the stuff that we've spoken about. So as I say, we're going to be sending you that email in a moment. I really don't want to trouble you if you're not interested in this material, so I'd be really grateful if you were to hit the no button if it isn't of any interest to you. So many thanks indeed. We have the standard risk warnings and notes that our regulators insist that we put out here. So I really want you to appreciate that the information I've shared here with you is really in order to enable you to ask good questions of your advisors. Many thanks for joining us, and over and out.